Now, the former US President Barack Obama has criticised President Trump after he rolled back much of America's climate change legislation. Well, the president says he's repealing a long-standing scientific finding that greenhouse gas emissions endanger human health. It means pollutants from cars, trucks and power plants, among the largest drivers of climate change, will no longer be regulated at the federal level.
Under the process just completed by the EPA, we are officially terminating the so-called endangerment finding, a disastrous Obama-era policy that severely damaged the American auto industry and massively drove up prices for American consumers. Prices went up incredibly for a worse product. This action will eliminate over $1.3 trillion of regulatory costs and help bring car prices tumbling down dramatically. You're going to get a better car. You're going to get a car that starts easier, a car that works better for a lot less money.
President Trump outlining the reasons behind that change. Well, let's hear now from John Kerry, of course, a former US Secretary of State who also served as President Biden's special envoy for climate. He's been speaking to the BBC to share his reaction.
There's a reason that we had an endangerment rule. And the reason is that the pollution, which is creating the crisis of climate, is dangerous. It's a killer. And the fact is that, this decision to just do away with it really takes Orwellian governance to a new height, and it invites enormous damage to people and property all around the world.
That's John Kerry there sharing his reaction. Well, let's get more reaction now by speaking to Graham Maxton, an author and climate change economist and an advisory board member of the UN's Pathways Project. Welcome to BBC News. Look, the president says this is for economic reasons, and there's always a balance, not just in the US, but even here in the UK, between how much being more climate aware costs. Do you think, on balance, though, there is an argument from the president's side to start with, and then we'll unpick the climate side to it?
I think what this is simply confirming is the trend which we've seen since President Trump took office, which is that there's a pushback against the environmental movement, against regulations which are seen to be restrictive on industry. So this is a step in the wrong direction. It's not a great leap in the wrong direction.
A step in the wrong direction. How much do you think this is going to be a blow for climate change and all the goals that world leaders are trying to meet when it comes to those COP summits and various other climate agreements?
I mean, as a signal, it certainly sends the wrong signal. It says that climate change is not real. It says that emissions don't count, and that you can do whatever you like. And that's certainly a very bad signal. In terms of the actual emissions, and this may surprise you considering I'm an environmentalist, I don't think it's that serious. The US accounts for about 11% of total emissions. So even if we see a 10% increase in their emissions as a result of this, then you'll see a 1% increase in global emissions. So it won't have a huge impact on global emissions, no matter what the US auto industry or the fossil fuel industry does.
And from I just wanted to ask you, following that, you say it won't have an impact there, but of course President Trump's rationale is he believes it would have an impact on the cost of cars.
I mean, it could. I mean, if car manufacturers take out catalytic converters and they change their engines to make them much more polluting, then of course it would make the cars cheaper and that would boost demand. But I don't think car manufacturers will necessarily do that, because the car industry is a global industry, and they sell their cars outside the US as well. So they're engineered for other markets. And it takes a long time to re-engineer a car, and they spend a lot of time and effort engineering cars to make them less polluting. So I think it's a signal again, but I'm not sure the auto industry in the US is going to leap wholeheartedly into the idea that it can take out all these pollution control measures.
Yeah, and I suppose that's because the car market's a global one, and so if cars were remodified for the US market, you wouldn't be able to sell them that easily in other countries where they do have climate regulations.
Exactly. Now, the US doesn't export a huge number of cars, but it does design them for international markets. The bigger concern is if they roll back the emissions regulations on the power plants, on the fossil fuel power plants, because that would certainly create a lot more pollution and a lot more emissions. Again, not globally important, but certainly for air quality in the US, that would be very serious.
And what do you think are the longer term repercussions of this announcement from the president then?
Well, as I say, not very large. I mean, we've already reached the point where climate change is becoming much more serious. What we've also got to remember is that it's not the annual emissions that are really important. It's the cumulative emissions. It's the buildup of emissions over the last 200 years, and particularly over the last 50 years, that really is causing climate change. What happens 1 year to the next is important, but it's not nearly as important as the buildup that's taken place. So what we're seeing with the US is that they may increase their level of emissions by maybe another 10%, which would be 1% in global terms, which is not going to change the overall outlook at this point. So it's a very bad signal, but it's not going to change the direction of where we're going to any great degree.
Okay, interesting perspective. Thank you very much for joining us, Graham Maxton.